Alright, so this is the second part of Project Nephilim, Cosmic Orgasm, and the Strange Fate of Charles Thompson. And I just want to say that, if anybody that watches or, listens to this story, has any comments, I'd appreciate it. If you could, write any comments, on your opinion, what do you think of the story, after watching this video. And I just want to start this off by reading a quote from Aleister Crowley. We have followed the devil through the dance of death, but there could be no doubt in our minds that the power of evil was permitted for a purpose. We obtained the ineffable assurance of the existence of a spiritual energy that worked its wondrous will in ways too strange for the heart of man to understand until the time should be ripe. The pestilence of the past had immunized us against its poison. The devil had defeated himself. We had attained a higher stage of evolution, and this understanding of the past filled us with absolute faith in the future. Alright. Back at the bureau, I was hailed as some type of hero. I remember walking through the door to the office and all of my colleagues applauding me. You would have thought I was the most valuable player in helping the feds reclaim the gold in some championship sporting event. Everyone was acting like my best friend, giving me high fives and cheering, which was kind of odd because I knew for a fact most of these guys thought I was a liability, and honestly, that wasn't far from the truth. Then once I made it past the ceremony of being smothered by that pseudo-gesture of victory, I reached my new boss's office. I hadn't had much time to do any research on him, but my first impression of him was that he seemed to appreciate my contribution to exposing all of these so-called patriots for what they really were, traitors to our democratic values. Of course, in theory, this sounded good as far as the greater good of the country was concerned, but I knew from history that nothing really ever changes after you bring the bad guys down. All this does is allow the power to change from one hand to another. That's the illusion about fighting crime. The problems are never really ever fixed. It just looks good to America when we're supposedly cleaning the world up. The truth is, all this does is give a reason to the ones that hold the purse strings to allocate more funds to the departments that are in charge of the crime-fighting illusion, further allowing them to control the world's assets as this cause helps boost the economy, further making the world spin round and round in the name of the almighty dollar. Regardless of how pointless all of the government's effort to stop crime is, I'm just glad to be back in good graces with my job. Before I leave his office, he tells me he wants a full report on these so-called Nephilims and to take a flight out to Roswell by tomorrow to meet with some of our boys that'll be there waiting my arrival. Lastly, he tells me to make myself pretty for the cameras because we're on in 5. Like every other time I've been televised to the nation, I just stand there behind the deputy director with some of the other agents at the podium. As the other agents and I stand there in silence, he reassures the public that treasonous acts like what was carried out by the ones who were supposed to fight for freedom will not be tolerated, and that he is making a pledge to the American people to not stop until every last Benedict Arnold is captured and brought to justice. I just continue to stand there as the cameras flash and the deputy director answers the press's questions, knowing that in time, history will just repeat itself. So what was done here will be done again in an endless cycle of good guys versus bad guys. How vain everything truly was. So now the scene changes. To get my mind off of all of this rubbish, I thought it best to go visit Nikki and see how she was doing. She had been released from the hospital and was back at her apartment, and as I would soon find out, was self-medicating in an attempt to numb the pain she was feeling from the recent chain of events. As I entered her home, I found her in the living room in just a t-shirt and underwear with a syringe and a pile of meth in front of her. She seemed really happy to see me and kept rambling on and on about how I had saved her life. Although I did in fact save her life, I could tell it was just the meth talking through her as she ranted on and on, patronizing me for keeping her safe, knowing I had just used her and actually put her in danger by letting her continue to work at the strip joint when I should have got her out of there after I learned about the impending threat. In the name of hospitality, Nikki offered me a shot of the meth and I accepted it. I figured, fuck it, I'll get all yacked out and Nikki and I will go at it for a couple of hours like a pair of possessed sex fiends. Then she began concocting a potion that would put to shame any male enhancement pill known to man and tied me off. Within seconds, the needle was in my vein, and after drawing up a little blood, the intoxicant was plunged into my bloodstream. I instantly tasted it in my throat, Then I felt its sensation massage itself throughout every part of my entire body, from hair follicle to skin particle to even stimulating my key to Nikki's sacred lock. Then an eerie cloud hovered over us, and what I hoped would not happen had begun. Psychosis. Something began extending itself out of Nikki's underwear and started to take shape. At first, it looked synonymous to some kind of slimy centipede stretching itself past her knee until it grew and completely metamorphosed into an insidious-looking life-size vagina, almost like a huge Venus flytrap, but with 2 rows from top to bottom of slime-dripping fangs. Then it began swaying back and forth and chomping at me. I knew this wasn't humanly possible, but in my drug-induced state, my brain tricked itself into believing it was, and that's when I realized this is how it's going to end. I'm going to be shredded alive like a block of cheese and ingested by this malevolent, sheath-like creature. Knowing the end was near, I began to prophesy. To live by the vagina was to die by the vagina, and this is what all of my life has led up to become ground parmesan to this awful beast in front of me. I began to scream and protest for it to stand down, but it just kept swaying back and forth and chomping at me. At this point, I knew it was only seconds before it would gobble me to bits, so I needed to make my move fast before it was too late. I could hear Nikki yelling about if I was alright, but with the beast in front of me swaying back and forth, I couldn't make out where she was. That's when I decided to make a run for it, and as I escaped out of Nikki's apartment, I found myself running down a dark street, and it started to happen again. My clothes began to take the form of snakes, crawling all over me, so I did the only reasonable thing one could do in my horrible state. I began to strip my clothes off, throwing them on the ground. As the cursed creature slithered in a pile on the ground, revolving in circles, I knew I needed to grab my badge and gun out of the heap, but I didn't want to get bitten. These slimy suckers had poisonous venom that could kill a man in only minutes, so I had to be careful or I was toast. Surprisingly, the snakes didn't react as I reached into the heap of them, grabbing my badge and gun, managing somehow not to get bitten. Now, I didn't care if they gave me a pass. I was not going to leave it up to chance, knowing a snake is a snake and can and will strike at any given moment, so I cocked back my service weapon and let them have it until the clip was empty. It was not long after that I was caught and detained after running down the street naked with my gun and badge, screaming about giant human-eating vaginas and snakes. So now the scene changes again. After a series of being tasered by hooded men in black cloaks and locked in the back of some sort of slave transportation wagon, I was brought to a giant castle and forced to eat these magic pills. Sometime after that, I ended up in a padded room. I remember yelling about how I was a federal agent on a special mission to save humanity and to let me out of the padded room, or this establishment would be put in jeopardy for interfering with a federal investigation. Then the door opened, and what stood in front of me was none other than a majestic goddess sent from the heavens above to save my soul out of the depths of Hades from the men in black cloaks' judgment. About this time, I began to come back to reality as I realized the pill I had taken with some kind of sedative began to take effect. The goddess who left her natural abode in the heavens to rescue me from the clutches of eternal punishment became nothing more than a beautiful blonde in a sexy black suit and heels by the name of Dr. Sandra being her Christian name. She was a doctor of psychology and she was concerned for my well-being. She had done some research on me and found to be true that I was in fact a federal agent. While digging up these facts on me, she discovered my famous YouTube video, and although reading about how the person in the video was not one and the same as me, she connected the dots. Then she brought me to her office and we had a long discussion on why these types of embarrassing events kept on happening. In her expert opinion, after hearing my story, she concluded that it was because of the overindulgence of drugs. In return, I had explained how I had been using them for so long, I didn't know how to cope with reality in the world without them. She told me I was spoken like a true addict. She then explained some of the neuroscience of what the long-term drug effects have probably done to my brain, which was nothing short of extraordinary. She told me they refer to this in the world of addiction as the point of no return, but not to worry because in time it could be fixed. To my surprise, she pulled out a joint, lit it, and began explaining that drugs should not be abused and in fact, when used in moderation, could be beneficial to us. Then she passed me the joint and I took a couple of hits. I told her it sounded like something Dr. Winston would say. That's when she asked if I was referring to the late Dr. Winston, who was a Nobel Prize winner, so I explained how he was my mentor and closest friend. As I was saying this, I noticed her eyes light up. She couldn't believe I had known the famous doctor and explained that she had earned her doctorate by writing a thesis on his work. She further explained that the thesis was on how to escape the professor's asshole complex. She told me that early on in her life she had battled depression, which led to some adverse consequences in her life, so she made the decision she wasn't going to be depressed anymore. It was simple, she said. All she had to do was change her thought process. She explained that our actions have consequences and our thoughts dictate these actions. So having positive thoughts leads to favorable outcomes, as negative ones leads to turmoil. It was that simple. Change our thoughts and our actions will change as well, leading to better outcomes. The professor had never explained it this simply to me before. It was always way too sophisticated for me to really grasp the wisdom behind it, but now I knew. Then, against all of her professionalism, she asked me to dinner. Of course, I accepted. Later that night, in the closed cafeteria, Sandy had made us some chicken Alfredo, which she had come to find out some time ago when she was vacationing abroad and tried to order it at a restaurant that it was in fact not authentic Italian food. It's kind of crazy because I never really interacted with someone like Sandy before. Honestly, I thought women like that only existed in books and movies. I was so used to the instant gratification of only sleeping with whores, which I had come to learn was another one of my problems. But regardless of my foolish past, over the course of that candlelit dinner, as I conversated and ate with Sandy in my hospital gown and slippers, something magical happened, and for the first time in my life, I began to fall in love.